The registry clerk slid the inked parchment across the counter with the indifference of a man who had processed 300 such assignments that month. And Isaac Foster realized his life had just become considerably more complicated than a blacksmith's ought to be. "Sign here," the clerk said, tapping a line at the bottom of the document. "The Resettlement Act mandates that single property holding men of conscriptable age accept one displaced orc refugee as a ward or registered bride. You've been matched with this one." Isaac looked past the clerk to the woman standing near the door. She was tiny, barely reaching his shoulder, with pale green skin that caught the afternoon light filtering through the dusty window. Her tusks were small, barely visible when her mouth was closed, and her dark hair was braided in a long plait that hung over one shoulder. She wore a simple gray dress that looked like it had been issued by the same bureaucracy that had assigned her to him. Her pointed ears twitched slightly when their eyes met, and she looked away quickly, folding her hands in front of her. "I did not request a bride," Isaac said. "No one requested anything. The war displaced 2,000 orcs when the Northern Territories fell. The Crown needs them housed and supervised. You have a forge, a homestead, and no dependents. The law is clear." Isaac looked at the document. His name was already filled in. So was hers, Nessa Jarrick. He thought about arguing, then remembered that arguing with clerks accomplished nothing. He had learned that during his 2 years in the territorial militia, where clerks had decided everything from boot sizes to burial details. He signed. The clerk stamped the parchment 3 times, made a notation in his ledger, and slid a second document across the counter. "This is your household registry update. She is legally your registered bride under the Act. You are responsible for her housing, conduct, and welfare. She may not leave the parish without written permission from you. Any children born of the union are legitimate and enrolled as Crown subjects. The registration fee is waived during the settlement period, but conversion to a sanctioned marriage requires a fee of 8 silver marks payable to the dioceses. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Then you are dismissed." The clerk was already reaching for the next file. Isaac picked up both documents, folded them carefully, and tucked them inside his coat. He walked to the door where Nessa stood waiting. Up close, she was even smaller than he had thought. Her eyes were amber, bright and wary, and she held herself very still as though she had learned that stillness was safer than movement. "Come," he said. She followed him out into the street without a word. The walk back to the forge took 20 minutes. Isaac did not speak, and neither did she. He was aware of the looks they drew, people glancing at them and then away, some curious, some disapproving. The war had been over for 6 months, but the resentment had not faded. Orcs had fought on both sides, but most humans remembered only the ones who had fought against the Crown, not the ones who had been displaced when their villages burned. The forge sat at the eastern edge of the village, a sturdy stone building with a slate roof and a fenced yard. Smoke rose from the chimney. Isaac had banked the fire before leaving that morning. The sign above the door read "Foster Smithy" in plain black letters. He pushed open the door and held it for Nessa. She stepped inside, looking around with open curiosity. The main room was dominated by the forge itself, a massive brick structure with a bellows and an anvil station nearby. Tools hung on the walls in neat rows. A workbench ran along one side, cluttered with half-finished projects, hinges, nails, a plowshare waiting to be sharpened. The air smelled of coal smoke and hot metal. "This is the smithy," Isaac said. "I work here during the day. The living quarters are through there." He gestured to a door at the back of the room. Nessa nodded. He led her through the door into the small house attached to the forge. The main room served as both kitchen and sitting area. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center. A fireplace took up most of one wall, and a narrow staircase led up to the loft. Everything was clean but spare, the home of a man who lived alone and saw no reason to accumulate unnecessary things. "You will sleep in the loft," Isaac said. "There is a bed and a chest for your belongings. I sleep down here." Nessa glanced at the staircase, then back at him. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was soft, with a slight roughness at the edges, like a file drawn across wood. "There is bread in the cupboard and cheese in the cold box. I will make supper later. If you need anything, ask. I will." Isaac turned and walked back into the smithy, closing the door behind him. He stood for a moment, staring at the forge, then went to the bellows and began pumping air into the coals. The fire brightened, and he picked up a piece of iron and thrust it into the flames, watching as it began to glow red, then orange, then white. He pulled it out and laid it on the anvil, then raised his hammer and brought it down with a ringing strike that echoed through the building. He worked until the light faded and his arms ached. When he finally returned to the house, Nessa was sitting at the table, hands folded in her lap. She had not touched the food. "You did not eat," he said. "I did not know if I was permitted." Isaac stopped. He looked at her for a long moment, then went to the cupboard and took out the bread, the cheese, and a jar of preserves. He set them on the table, then fetched 2 plates and 2 knives. He cut thick slices of bread, added cheese to each, and pushed 1 plate toward her. "You are permitted," he said. "You do not need to ask." She picked up the bread carefully and took a small bite. Her eyes brightened slightly, and she took another bite, larger this time. Isaac ate his own food in silence, then stood and began preparing a simple stew for supper, chopping carrots and onions, and adding them to a pot with water and a bit of salted pork. He hung the pot on the hook over the fire and let it simmer. "Can you cook?" he asked without turning around. "Yes." "Then you may do so if you wish, or not, as you prefer." "I will cook," Nessa said. "If that is acceptable." "It is." They ate the stew when it was ready, still in silence. Nessa washed the dishes afterward without being asked, and Isaac did not stop her. When the sun had fully set, he gestured toward the stairs. "You should sleep." "Yes," she hesitated. "Good night, Isaac." "Good night." She climbed the stairs, her footsteps light on the wood, and disappeared into the loft. Isaac banked the fire, checked the locks, and settled onto the narrow cot he kept in the corner of the main room. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of Nessa moving above him as she prepared for bed. He had not wanted a wife, registered or otherwise. He had grown accustomed to solitude, found comfort in it. But the law was the law, and he was not a man to break it without reason. He closed his eyes and willed himself to sleep. The first week passed in the same stiff, careful rhythm. Isaac worked in the forge and Nessa kept to the house. She cooked meals that were surprisingly good, cleaned without fuss, and asked for nothing. They spoke only when necessary, their conversations brief and practical. "You need anything from the market?" he would ask. "Flour, if there is money for it." "There is." He would return with flour and whatever else seemed needful, and she would thank him, and that would be the end of it on the 8th day. Isaac was shoeing a horse for a farmer named Garrett when he heard a strange sound from behind the forge. It was a low, pained whine, almost inaudible beneath the clang of his hammer. He set down his tools and followed the sound to the back of the building, where a dog lay in the dirt, panting. Isaac recognized him. The dog was a stray that had been hanging around the village for months, a rangy hound with a gray muzzle and a pronounced limp in his left hind leg. People chased him off or ignored him, and he had grown thin and wary. The dog watched Isaac with wary eyes, too tired to run. Isaac crouched down slowly, keeping his movements calm. "Easy," he said quietly. Easy now. The dog whined again. Isaac went back into the forge and returned with a bowl of water and some scraps of meat left over from breakfast. He set them down a few feet from the dog and stepped back. The dog waited, then dragged himself forward and lapped at the water desperately. When the bowl was empty, he ate the meat. Isaac watched for a moment, then went back to work. The next morning, the dog was still there. Isaac brought him more food and water, and the dog ate without hesitation this time. By the third day, the dog had moved closer to the door, and by the fifth, he was lying just inside the smithy, watching Isaac work with calm, patient eyes. Nessa noticed on the sixth day. Isaac had just brought the dog another bowl of water when she appeared in the doorway, carrying a basket of mending. "You have a dog," she said. "He has a bad leg. He will leave when it heals." Nessa set down her basket and crouched beside the dog, running her fingers gently over his head. The dog sighed and leaned into her touch. "He likes you," she said, glancing up at Isaac. "He likes anyone who feeds him." "No, he trusts you. That is different." Isaac did not answer. He returned to the anvil and resumed his work, but he was aware of Nessa sitting with the dog, speaking to him in a low, soothing voice. When she finally stood and went back to the house, the dog watched her go, then looked at Isaac as though expecting an explanation. "I do not have one," Isaac muttered. The dog sighed and laid his head on his paws. The magistrate's assistant arrived on a cold morning in early autumn. His name was Howell, and he carried himself with the smug authority of a man who enjoyed enforcing rules no one else cared about. He had a thin face, pale eyes, and a voice like a rusted hinge. "I am conducting a compliance inspection," he announced, stepping into the smithy without invitation. "The Crown requires verification that registered brides are being housed in accordance with the Resettlement Act." Isaac set down his hammer. "She is housed. She has a bed, food, and clothing. The law is satisfied. I will determine what satisfies the law." Howell looked around the smithy with a critical eye, then walked toward the door to the house. "You do not have permission to enter my home," Isaac said. Howell turned, smiling thinly. "The Act grants me the authority to inspect any household registered under its provisions. If you obstruct me, I will note it in my report." Isaac said nothing. Howell pushed open the door. Nessa was standing at the table kneading dough. She looked up as Howell entered, her hand stilling. "You are the orc bride assigned to this household?" Howell asked. "I am." "State your name." "Nessa Jarrick." Howell walked around the room, peering at the cupboards, the fireplace, the staircase. "You sleep in the loft?" "Yes." "Show me." Nessa wiped her hands on her apron and climbed the stairs. Howell followed. Isaac stepped into the doorway, his jaw tight, and watched as Howell inspected the loft, opening the chest, examining the bed, running his hand over the blankets. "This will do," Howell said finally. He descended the stairs and made several notes on a sheet of parchment. Then he turned to Nessa. "Has the registered husband mistreated you in any way?" "No." "Has he failed to provide adequate food, shelter, or clothing?" "No." "Do you understand that you are a ward of the Crown and that your assignment may be transferred at any time if this household is found to be unsuitable?" Nessa's eyes flicked to Isaac, then back to Howell. "I understand." "Good." Howell folded the parchment and tucked it inside his coat. "The household is in compliance." He walked toward the door, then paused and looked at Nessa with a smile that made Isaac's hands curl into fists. "You are fortunate to have been assigned to a man with property. Some of your kind were not so lucky." "I am grateful," Nessa said quietly. Howell left. Isaac stood in the doorway for a moment, breathing slowly, then turned and walked back into the smithy. He picked up a piece of iron and thrust it into the forge, pumping the bellows until the flames roared. He pulled the iron out and hammered it with short, violent strikes, each blow ringing like a bell. He did not hear Nessa approach until she spoke. "Thank you," she said. Isaac stopped mid-swing. "For what?" "For not letting him speak to you the way he spoke to me." Isaac set down the hammer and turned to face her. "I did not stop him. You wanted to, I saw it." He looked at her for a long moment. Her amber eyes were steady, and there was something in them that he could not name. "He is an insufferable weasel," Isaac said finally. Nessa smiled, just a little. "He is." She turned and walked back to the house, and Isaac stood alone in the smithy, staring at the glowing coals. The weather turned colder as autumn deepened. Isaac brought in wood for the winter and repaired the roof where it had leaked the previous spring. Nessa made preserves from the last of the apples and sewed new curtains for the windows. The dog, whom neither of them had officially named but both called Old Fellow when they spoke to him, had recovered enough to walk without limping, but he showed no inclination to leave. Isaac found himself watching Nessa more often than he meant to. She moved through the house with quiet efficiency, humming sometimes while she worked. She had a way of tilting her head when she was thinking, and her ears would twitch when she found something funny, even if she did not laugh aloud. She spoke to the dog as though he could understand every word, and perhaps he could, because he followed her everywhere and rested his head on her knee whenever she sat down. One evening, Isaac returned from delivering a set of hinges to a customer and found Nessa sitting on the floor of the smithy scratching the dog behind the ears. The dog was lying on his side, eyes half closed, utterly content. "He adores you," Isaac said. Nessa looked up. "He adores anyone who scratches the right spot. That is what I said about the food. And you were wrong then, too." She smiled at him, and Isaac felt something strange and uncomfortable shift in his chest. He turned away and busied himself with banking the forge fire. "Supper will be ready soon," he said. "I made stew. It is staying warm by the hearth." "Good." He could feel her watching him, but he did not turn around. When she finally stood and went back into the house, he let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. That night, he lay awake on his cot, staring at the ceiling, and admitted to himself what he had been trying to ignore for weeks. He was growing accustomed to her presence, more than accustomed. He looked forward to seeing her in the mornings, to the meals they shared, to the small moments when she smiled or laughed or said something that surprised him. He liked the sound of her voice and the way she moved, and the fact that she had claimed his stray dog as her own. It was inconvenient. It was dangerous. The law that had assigned her to him also controlled her, and he had no claim to her beyond what the registry granted. If he allowed himself to care, and if she were reassigned, it would hurt in a way he was not prepared to endure. He resolved to keep his distance. The resolution lasted 2 days. On the morning of the third day, Isaac was working on a set of iron gates for the village church when Howell returned. He did not knock. He simply walked into the smithy as though he owned it, holding a new set of documents. "Isaac Foster," he said, "I am here to inform you that your household registration is under review." Isaac set down his hammer. "Why?" "There have been questions raised about the suitability of this arrangement. Specifically, it has been suggested that you lack the resources to maintain a registered bride in a manner befitting Crown standards. That is a lie. Regardless, the review is mandatory. I will be conducting interviews with both you and the orc woman. If the household is found unsuitable, she will be reassigned." Isaac felt something cold and sharp settle in his stomach. "When?" "The interviews will take place in 3 days. I suggest you prepare your answers carefully." Howell smiled his thin, unpleasant smile and turned to leave. Isaac caught him by the arm. Howell stopped, looking down at Isaac's hand with exaggerated surprise. Release me, Howell said. Who raised the questions? Isaac asked. That information is confidential. Who? Howell pulled his arm free and stepped back, his smile widening. You would be wise to remember your place, Foster. You are a tradesman, nothing more. The Crown granted you a bride as a courtesy, but the Crown can take her back just as easily. Mind your manners, or you may find yourself living alone again. He left, and Isaac stood in the center of the smithy, shaking with anger. Nessa appeared in the doorway a moment later. What did he want? Isaac turned to her, and the words caught in his throat. She was standing with one hand on the doorframe, her expression worried, and he realized with sudden, painful clarity that he could not let her be taken away. He did not care what the law said. He did not care what Howell or the Crown or anyone else thought was suitable. She belonged here with him, and he would fight to keep her if he had to. He is threatening to reassign you, Isaac said. Nessa went very still. Why? He claims there are questions about whether I can provide for you adequately. It is an excuse. He wants to see if he can push me into doing something foolish. What will you do? Isaac looked at her for a long moment. I will not let him take you. Her amber eyes widened. Isaac, you cannot defy the Crown. They will punish you. Then they will punish me. No. She crossed the room and stood in front of him, her hands clenched at her sides. I will not let you destroy your life for me. If they reassign me, I will go. It will be all right. It will not. It will. I have survived worse things than being moved to a different household. I do not care. The words came out sharper than he intended, and Nessa flinched. Isaac forced himself to take a breath to soften his voice. I do not care what you have survived. I care that you are here, and I do not want you anywhere else. Nessa stared at him. Why? Because you are kind and clever, and you make this house feel less empty. Because you laugh at my bad temper, and you talk to that ridiculous dog as though he were a person. Because I look forward to seeing you every morning, and the thought of you being sent away makes me want to break something. Her ears twitched and a flush darkened her green cheeks. Isaac, I know the law, he continued. I know what the registry says, but I do not care. If Howell comes back and tries to take you, I will refuse. I will find a way to keep you here, even if it means breaking the law. Nessa reached out slowly and took his hand. Her fingers were small and warm, and they curled around his with surprising strength. You are a strange man, Isaac Foster, he almost smiled. So I have been told. She stepped closer, rising onto her toes, and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, tentative and brief, but it struck Isaac like a hammer blow. He stood frozen for a heartbeat, then reached up and cupped her face in his hands, kissing her back with all the hunger and longing he had been trying to suppress for weeks. She made a small sound against his mouth and pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. I did not plan that, Nessa said, her voice unsteady. I am glad you did it anyway. She laughed, a bright, startled sound, and Isaac felt something warm and fierce bloom in his chest. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the taste of her and the way she sighed against him. When they parted a second time, he rested his forehead against hers. I meant what I said. I will not let them take you. Then we will find a way to stop them, Nessa said. Isaac nodded. We will. That night, Isaac sat at the table with the registry documents spread out in front of him. Nessa sat across from him, watching as he read through the dense, formal language. The law is clear, Isaac said finally. You are assigned to me as a registered bride, but the registration is not a true marriage under Crown law. To convert the registration into a sanctioned marriage, we would need to pay a fee of 8 silver marks to the DOCs and submit a formal petition. Without that, the Crown retains the right to reassign you at any time. Do you have 8 silver marks? Nessa asked. Isaac shook his head. I have 3. It would take me months to earn the rest, and Howell is conducting his review in 3 days. Nessa was quiet for a moment. What if we married without the Crown's permission? What do you mean? The old writes. Before the Crown centralized the church, villages used to conduct their own marriage ceremonies. My grandmother told me stories about them. A couple would stand before their neighbors and make vows, and that was enough. No priests, no fees, no registry, just 2 people and their community. Isaac leaned back in his chair. The Crown does not recognize those rights anymore. Legally, we would still be only a registered pairing. But morally, we would be married. And if we stood before the village and made our vows, Howell would have a harder time justifying a reassignment. He could argue that you lack resources, but he could not argue that the household is unstable if we are publicly committed to each other. Isaac thought about it. It was a risk. If they married by the old rites and the Crown refused to recognize it, they would be no better off than before. But Nessa was right. A public ceremony would make it harder for Howell to claim that the household was unsuitable. And if they could find a legal loophole afterward, they might be able to force the Crown to honor the marriage. It might work, he said slowly, but we would need witnesses, and we would need to do it before Howell's review. Tomorrow, then. Isaac looked at her across the table. Her amber eyes were bright and determined, and he felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. You would marry me, truly? I would. She reached across the table and took his hand. I have wanted to for weeks. Isaac raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Then we will do it tomorrow. The next morning, Isaac went to see the village headman, a gruff, practical man named Duncan who had known Isaac since he was a boy. Duncan listened to the plan without interrupting, then nodded. I remember the old rites, Duncan said. My grandparents were married that way. If you want to do this, I will support it, but you will need more than just me. The more witnesses you have, the stronger your claim. Will you help me gather them? I will. By midday, Duncan had spread the word. A dozen villagers agreed to come, including Garrett the farmer, the widow Tess who ran the bakery, and the blacksmith's apprentice Isaac had trained 2 years earlier. They would gather in the forge yard at sunset. Isaac spent the afternoon cleaning the yard and setting up benches. Nessa baked bread and prepared a simple meal to share afterward. Neither of them spoke much, but they moved around each other with an easy familiarity, their hands brushing as they worked. When the sun began to set, the villagers arrived. They stood in a loose circle in the yard, their faces curious and kind. Duncan stepped forward, carrying an old leather-bound book that had belonged to his grandfather. We are gathered here to witness the marriage of Isaac Foster and Nessa Jarrick, Duncan said, his voice carrying across the yard. This is an old rite, one that our ancestors honored before the Crown centralized the church. It is simple and true, and it requires only 2 things: the commitment of the couple and the witness of the community. He turned to Isaac and Nessa. Do you, Isaac Foster, take this woman as your wife? Do you vow to honor her, protect her, and stand by her in all things? I do, Isaac said. Do you, Nessa Jarrick, take this man as your husband? Do you vow to honor him, support him, and stand by him in all things? I do, Nessa said. Duncan smiled. Then by the authority of this community, I declare you married. What has been joined here, let no one divide. The villagers clapped and cheered. Nessa turned to Isaac, her eyes bright, and he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. The crowd cheered louder, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing. They shared the meal Nessa had prepared, and the villagers stayed late into the evening, talking and laughing and toasting the newlyweds with mugs of ale. When the last of them finally left, Isaac and Nessa stood alone in the yard, the stars bright overhead. We did it, Nessa said softly. We did. Isaac wrapped his arms around her and held her close. Whatever happens now, you are my wife. No one can change that. Nessa rested her head against his chest. I love you, Isaac. He closed his eyes and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I love you too. They went inside together, and for the first time Nessa did not climb the stairs to the loft. She stayed with Isaac, and they lay together on the narrow cot, tangled in each other's arms, too full of joy to sleep. Howell arrived exactly 3 days after his last visit, as promised. He knocked sharply on the door of the smithy, and Isaac opened it with Nessa at his side. I am here to conduct the review, Howell announced. There is no need, Isaac said. Nessa is no longer just a registered bride. She is my wife. Howell's expression did not change. The registry does not indicate a sanctioned marriage. If you have married without paying the diocesan fee and submitting the proper petition, the union is not recognized under Crown law. We married by the old rites, Isaac said. We stood before the community and made our vows. The village recognizes the marriage. The village does not have the authority to sanction marriages. Only the Crown does. Then the Crown is in the wrong. Howell's eyes narrowed. You are treading dangerous ground, Foster. If you refuse to comply with the review, I will have no choice but to recommend that the orc woman be removed from your household immediately. Try it, Isaac said. Try to take my wife from me and see what happens. Howell stepped back, his hand moving toward the satchel at his side. You are threatening a Crown official. I am defending my home. The two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Then a new voice spoke from behind Howell. That will not be necessary. Isaac looked past Howell to see a woman standing in the doorway. She was middle-aged, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a traveling cloak dusted with road dirt. She carried a leather case under one arm and had the unmistakable air of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Who are you? Howell demanded. My name is Maris Caulfield. I am a circuit clerk for the Crown, assigned to review disputed household registrations. She looked at Howell with cool disdain. I have been investigating complaints that you have been abusing your authority, Mr. Howell. Threatening to reassign orc brides without just cause, demanding bribes in exchange for favorable reports, and generally conducting yourself in a manner unbecoming of a Crown official. Howell's face went pale. That is a lie. It is not. I have testimony from 6 households in this parish alone. Maris turned to Isaac. May I come in, please? Isaac stepped aside, and Maris entered the smithy with Howell trailing behind her like a whipped dog. Maris set her case on the workbench and opened it, pulling out several documents. I understand you married this woman by the old rites. I did, Isaac said. We have witnesses. How many? 12. Maris nodded. And you have been living together as man and wife since the ceremony. We have. Good. She pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment and began writing. There is a provision in the Resettlement Act that allows for the conversion of a registered pairing into a sanctioned marriage under special circumstances. One of those circumstances is a demonstrated commitment to the union, as evidenced by a public ceremony and the support of the local community. If you can provide written statements from your witnesses attesting to the legitimacy of your marriage, I can authorize the conversion without requiring the diocesan fee. Isaac stared at her. You can do that. I can. The law is complex, and most officials do not bother to learn the exceptions. But I make it my business to know them. She glanced at Howell, who was standing stiffly near the door. You are dismissed, Mr. Howell. I will be filing a formal complaint about your conduct with the regional magistrate. I suggest you prepare a defense. Howell opened his mouth, then closed it again. He turned and walked out without another word. Maris watched him go, then turned back to Isaac. I will need those witness statements within the week. Can you provide them? I can. Good. Once I have them, I will process the conversion and update the registry. You and your wife will be legally married under Crown law with all the rights and protections that entails. She closed her case and picked it up. Congratulations, by the way. I wish you both a long and happy life together. She left as briskly as she had arrived, and Isaac stood in the center of the smithy, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Nessa touched his arm. Is it over? Isaac turned to her, and a slow smile spread across his face. It is over. She threw her arms around him, and he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle. She laughed, bright and joyous, and he set her down and kissed her, pouring all his relief and love and gratitude into the kiss. When they broke apart, Nessa cupped his face in her hands. We are really married, truly married. We are. I cannot believe it. Neither can I. Isaac took her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. But I am grateful for it, for you, for all of this. Nessa smiled, her eyes shining. So am I. That evening, Isaac went door to door, collecting written statements from the witnesses who had attended their wedding. Every one of them was happy to provide one, and several added personal notes of congratulations and support. Garrett wrote that he had never seen Isaac so happy, and that Nessa was a blessing to the village. Tess wrote that she hoped they would have many children and much joy. Duncan wrote that the marriage was a reminder of the old ways, when love and commitment were more important than paperwork and fees. Isaac delivered the statements to Maris the next morning, and she reviewed them with a careful eye before nodding in satisfaction. These will do, she said. I will have the updated registry documents ready within a fortnight. You should receive your copies by post. Thank you, Isaac said. For everything. Maris smiled, the first real warmth he had seen from her. I am only doing my job, but you are welcome. The documents arrived 2 weeks later, exactly as promised. Isaac opened the package at the kitchen table with Nessa leaning over his shoulder. Inside were 2 copies of the updated registry, both stamped with the official seal of the Crown. The text was clear and formal. Isaac Foster and Nessa Jarrick are hereby recognized as lawfully married under the laws of the Crown, with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities pertaining thereto. Nessa traced her fingers over the seal. It is real, she said softly. It is. Isaac folded the documents carefully and set them aside. You are stuck with me now, she laughed. I think I can manage. Winter came early that year, bringing snow and biting winds that howled around the forge. Isaac kept the fires burning day and night, and Nessa filled the house with warmth and light. She sewed blankets and baked bread and filled the air with the smell of spices and wood smoke. The dog, who had fully claimed his place as a member of the household, spent his days sprawled in front of the hearth, basking in the heat. Isaac found himself marveling at how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been alone, content in his solitude but unaware of how much he was missing. Now, he had a wife who made him laugh and challenged him and filled every corner of his life with joy. He had a home that felt lived in, a dog who greeted him every morning with a wagging tail, and a future that stretched out before him, bright and full of promise. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Nessa rested her head on Isaac's shoulder and sighed contentedly. Are you happy? She asked. I am, Isaac said. Are you? I am. She paused, then tilted her head to look up at him. Do you ever think about what might have happened if the Crown had assigned me to someone else? If Howell had succeeded in reassigning me? Isaac tightened his arm around her. I try not to. I think about it sometimes, and then I am grateful that I was assigned to you, that you are stubborn and brave and willing to fight for what you believe in. Isaac kissed the top of her head. I would fight for you 100 times over. Nessa smiled. I know." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling and the dog snoring softly at their feet. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the house was warm and safe. As the winter months passed, Isaac and Nessa settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. They worked together during the day, Isaac in the forge and Nessa in the house, and they spent their evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and simply enjoying each other's company. They made love with the same easy familiarity, learning each other's bodies and finding joy in the smallest touches and whispered words. Spring arrived slowly, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the earth. Isaac planted a garden behind the house, and Nessa tended it with careful hands, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the soil. The dog, now sleek and healthy, spent his days chasing rabbits and basking in the sun. One morning in late spring, Nessa came into the smithy with a strange expression on her face. Isaac set down his hammer and turned to her, concerned. "What is wrong?" he asked. "Nothing is wrong." She paused, then smiled, a slow, wondering smile. "I think I am with child." Isaac stared at her. "You think? I am certain. I have all the signs." She placed a hand on her stomach. "We are going to have a baby, Isaac." Isaac crossed the room in 3 strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet. She laughed and clung to him, and he spun her in a circle, his heart pounding with a joy so fierce it nearly brought him to his knees. "A baby," he said, setting her down and cupping her face in his hands. "We are going to have a baby. We are." He kissed her, slow and deep, and when they broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Isaac's life. He watched as Nessa's belly grew round and full, and he marveled at the changes in her body, the way she glowed with health and happiness. He built a cradle from smooth oak, carving it with careful hands and fitting it together with pegs instead of nails so that it would be safe and strong. Nessa sewed blankets and tiny clothes, and the house filled with soft, pastel colors and the scent of fresh laundry. Autumn arrived again, painting the trees gold and red, and Nessa went into labor on a crisp October morning. Isaac sent for the midwife, a sturdy woman named Brenna, who had delivered half the babies in the village, and he stayed by Nessa's side through the long hours of labor, holding her hand and murmuring words of encouragement. The baby was born just after sunset, a healthy boy with green skin and tiny tusks and a shock of dark hair. He wailed lustily as Brenna cleaned him and wrapped him in a soft blanket, and when she placed him in Nessa's arms, Nessa looked down at him with tears streaming down her face. "He is perfect," she whispered. Isaac sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, and looked down at his son. The baby's eyes were closed, his tiny fists waving in the air, and Isaac felt a love so overwhelming it stole his breath. "What should we name him?" Nessa asked. Isaac thought for a moment. "Vincent, after my grandfather." Nessa smiled. "Vincent Foster, I like it." Vincent opened his eyes and stared up at them with unfocused wonder, and Isaac leaned down and kissed Nessa's temple. "Thank you," he said softly, "for this, for everything." Nessa turned her head and kissed him. "Thank you for fighting for me, for us." They sat together, the 3 of them, as the stars came out and the night settled around them, and Isaac knew that he had everything he had ever wanted. The years that followed were full of laughter and work, and the sweet chaos of raising a child. Vincent grew quickly, a bright, curious boy who loved to watch his father work the forge and follow his mother around the garden. He learned to walk and talk and run, and he filled the house with noise and energy and endless questions. When Vincent was 2, Nessa became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to another boy whom they named Paxton. Paxton was quieter than Vincent, more thoughtful, but just as full of love and mischief. The two brothers were inseparable, playing together in the yard and getting into trouble with the kind of gleeful determination that only small children could manage. Isaac expanded the forge, taking on an apprentice to help with the growing workload, and Nessa sold her preserves and baked goods at the market, earning enough to help support the family. They saved money carefully, adding to the house and improving the property, and they built a life that was simple but full of meaning. When Vincent was 5 and Paxton was 3, the village held a harvest festival. Isaac and Nessa took the boys, along with the old dog, who was graying around the muzzle but still spry enough to keep up with the children. They spent the day eating roasted chestnuts and watching the dancing and playing games, and when the sun set and the lanterns were lit, Isaac took Nessa's hand and led her to the edge of the crowd. "You remember the night we married?" he asked. "Of course. I was terrified that night. I did not know if we would succeed, if we would be able to stay together. But I knew that I had to try, because the thought of losing you was unbearable." Nessa squeezed his hand. "I was terrified too, but I trusted you. I knew that you would find a way." Isaac looked out at the festival, at the people laughing and dancing and celebrating, and then at his sons who were chasing each other around the dog. "I am glad we fought for this, for us. I cannot imagine my life without you." "Neither can I." Nessa leaned her head against his shoulder. "We have built something good here, Isaac. Something worth fighting for. We have." They stood together watching the festival, and Isaac felt a deep, abiding contentment settle over him. He had a wife he loved, children who brought him joy, and a home that was full of warmth and laughter. He had everything he had ever wanted, and he had earned it by being brave enough to defy the law and fight for the woman he loved. As the years passed, Isaac and Nessa grew older together. Their sons grew into strong, capable young men who learned their father's trade and helped run the forge. Vincent, the elder, inherited Isaac's stubbornness and Nessa's warmth, and he became a skilled blacksmith in his own right. Paxton, the younger, had his mother's cleverness and his father's quiet determination, and he became a craftsman known throughout the region for his fine work. The old dog passed away peacefully one winter morning, and they buried him in the garden beneath the apple tree. Isaac carved a small marker for him, and Nessa planted flowers around it, and they mourned him together, grateful for the years they had shared. Isaac's hair turned gray, and Nessa's face gained lines and character, but they still held hands when they walked and still sat by the fire in the evenings, talking about their day and planning for the future. They became grandparents when Vincent married a kind, strong woman from the neighboring village and had children of his own, and they delighted in spoiling their grandchildren and watching them grow. One summer evening, when Isaac was in his 60s and Nessa in her late 50s, they sat together on the bench outside the forge, watching the sun set over the fields. The air was warm and sweet with the scent of hay and wildflowers, and the sky was painted in shades of gold and pink. "Do you ever think about that day Howell came to inspect the house?" Nessa asked. Isaac chuckled. "Sometimes." "Why?" "I was so afraid that day. I thought I would be taken away, and I did not know what would happen to me, but you fought for me. You defied the law and risked everything just to keep me by your side." Isaac took her hand. "I would do it again in a heartbeat." Nessa smiled. "I know, and that is why I love you." They sat in silence for a while, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Isaac thought about all the years they had shared, all the struggles and triumphs and quiet moments of joy. He thought about the night they had married in the forge yard, with the village as their witnesses and the kiss that had changed everything. "I am grateful," Isaac said softly, "for all of it. For you, for our sons, for this life we have built. I could not have asked for more. Nessa leaned her head against his shoulder. Neither could I. They sat together as the stars came out, and Isaac knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Years later, when Isaac was an old man with silver hair and gnarled hands, he stood in the forge yard and looked out at the life he had built. The forge was still running, now managed by Vincent with Paxton's help. The house was full of laughter and noise as his grandchildren played in the yard and his sons worked side by side, their voices mingling with the ring of hammer on anvil. Nessa was in the garden, tending to the vegetables with the same careful hands that had tended them for decades. Her hair was white now, and she moved more slowly than she once had, but her eyes were still bright, and her smile was still the same one that had captured Isaac's heart so many years ago. Isaac walked over to her and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. She leaned back against him, sighing contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how lucky I am. Lucky to have been assigned you, to have fought for you, to have spent my life with you." Nessa turned in his arms and looked up at him, her amber eyes soft. "I am the lucky one." Isaac kissed her, slow and gentle, and they stood together in the garden, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they had nurtured. That evening, as the sun set and the family gathered for supper, Isaac sat at the head of the table and looked around at the faces he loved. His sons, strong and proud. His grandchildren, full of energy and joy. And Nessa, sitting beside him, her hand resting on his. He had defied the law for her. He had risked everything to keep her by his side, and it had been worth it, every moment, every struggle, every triumph. As the meal ended and the family scattered to their evening tasks, Isaac and Nessa remained at the table, sitting close together in the fading light. "You have any regrets?" Nessa asked suddenly. Isaac looked at her in surprise. "No, why would you ask that? I just wonder sometimes if you ever wish you had lived a simpler life, without the complications, without the fight." Isaac shook his head. "The fight was what made it worth living. I chose you, Nessa. I chose us, and I would make the same choice every day for the rest of my life." Nessa's eyes filled with tears and she leaned over and kissed him. "I love you, Isaac Foster. I love you too." They sat together as the stars came out and Isaac felt a deep, abiding peace. He had lived a good life, a full life, and he had done it with the woman he loved by his side. The government had assigned him a tiny orc bride, and her first kiss had made him defy the law. But in the end, it was not defiance that had saved them. It was love, pure and simple, and the willingness to fight for it against all odds. And that, Isaac thought as he held Nessa close, was a legacy worth leaving behind.